At my niece's celebration dinner, they told me, "There's no seat for you at the main table." That's when I knew I wasn't family anymore. My mother laughed as my sister-in-law added, "It's better this way. Natalie prefers being invisible, remember?" Everyone chuckled. I smiled quietly, clutching the gift I brought, a scholarship envelope for the girl they were toasting. I sat near the hallway door, away from the wine and the warmth, while the rest of them celebrated success I helped make possible. That's when I saw him, a quiet guest in a grey suit, watching everything, including me. They always said I was the easy one, the quiet daughter, the reliable sibling, the one who didn't cause trouble, didn't make waves, didn't need much. That's what made it so easy for them to forget me. My name is Natalie Harper. I'm 42 years old, a registered nurse at a community care clinic, and to my family, I've always been the placeholder, the extra, the one they called when someone needed a ride, a babysitter, or a donation, but never when it was time to celebrate. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, stayed kind enough, gave enough, one day they'd see me. Not just notice me, but really see me. I thought maybe my mother would finally say she was proud, or my brother would stop letting his wife speak over me. But years passed, and I remained the dependable background noise of our family, heard but never truly heard. When my sister-in-law Tiffany had her first child, I was there every night for 3 weeks, rocking that baby to sleep while she recovered from a difficult birth. I cooked, cleaned, even helped settle hospital bills when my brother's insurance fell short. No one asked me to, I just did it. That's who I am. Years later, when I needed an emergency appendectomy, I listed my mother as my emergency contact. She didn't answer, she was on a cruise. Tiffany texted, "Hope it's not serious. We're in Napa." I lay alone in a hospital bed for 2 days. My neighbour brought me soup. I never brought it up, not once, because I believed that if I just stayed quiet, they'd love me more for not being a burden. But that night, the night of my niece's celebration dinner, something inside me cracked. It was supposed to be a casual family gathering at my brother's house, celebrating his daughter being accepted into Stanford. I arrived early, carrying a handmade scrapbook I'd worked on for weeks, and a sealed envelope with a scholarship application I'd pulled strings to secure for her. I even helped Tiffany arrange the centerpieces, but when it came time for dinner, Tiffany announced the seating. "Family at the main table," she said with a smile so wide it was almost real. My name wasn't on a card. When I asked quietly, she waved it off. "Oh, Natalie, you don't mind sitting at the back with the kids, right? It's just, we had limited space." My mother chuckled. "She's always been more comfortable in the background." They laughed. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I smiled, said, "Of course," took my plate and sat at the folding table near the hallway, next to a stack of unopened soda cans. I told myself I'd eat quickly and leave, but then I overheard Tiffany, her voice sharp and clear across the kitchen. "I mean, she's 42, no husband, no kids, still living in that tiny apartment. She says she's a nurse, but at some free clinic? Isn't that just volunteering?" Someone muttered something. Laughter followed. I didn't move. My fork rested on cold chicken. My hands shook slightly. And in that moment, I realized something painful. I wasn't just forgotten. I was erased. That's when I felt it, that strange awareness you get when you're being watched. I looked toward the living room. A man in a grey suit sat silently near the fireplace, a guest I didn't recognize. His eyes met mine. He didn't smile, but he nodded. It was the first time all night I felt seen. I wasn't sure who he was. Grey suit, calm posture, a glass of red wine untouched in his hand. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't glance at his phone, didn't even seem to blink. But he was watching, not in a predatory way, in a present way, like someone observing a courtroom or a slow-burning scene in a play. I turned away, pretending to check my phone, my heart still thudding from Tiffany's words. That's just volunteering. 42 and nothing to show for it. No one had corrected her, not my mother, not my brother, not even my niece. the one I'd stayed up tutoring when she nearly failed chemistry last year. I stood slowly, carrying my plate toward the kitchen. Tiffany and my brother were laughing about something else now. She wore her usual silk top and perfectly timed smirk. My mother stirred the salad, talking loudly about Stanford and how proud we all are. I didn't interrupt. I placed my plate in the sink, wiped my hands on a paper towel, and turned toward the front hallway. I needed air. Maybe an Uber, maybe 3 glasses of wine, I wasn't sure. That's when the man from the living room appeared beside me. "I hope you don't mind," he said softly. "I thought you might want this." He held out a linen napkin. My hand had started bleeding, a small cut, probably from the cracked dinner plate I hadn't noticed. I blinked, startled. "Oh, thank you." He nodded. "Sometimes pain shows up small but sharp." I gave a weak laugh. "Tell me about it." He didn't smile, but there was kindness in his eyes. "They don't see you." I swallowed. "No," I said. "They really don't." We stood there in silence for a moment, the hum of voices and clinking glasses muffled behind us. "I'm Leonard Kane," he said finally, extending his hand. The name didn't register. I shook it. "Natalie Harper." He tilted his head slightly. "Nurse Harper. From Oakview Community Clinic?" I blinked. "How do you know that?" "I read your name on the donor recognition list last year. You volunteered 600 hours. Impressive." I stared. No one in my own family knew that, or cared. But this stranger, this grey-suited man sipping untouched wine in my brother's living room. "I have a soft spot for people who help others quietly," he added. I wanted to ask more. Who was he really? Why was he here? But before I could speak, my niece's voice rang out from the dining room. "Where's Aunt Natalie?" Tiffany's voice followed. "Probably hiding in the laundry room. She does that." Laughter. Leonard's jaw twitched. He handed me a card. Simple, elegant, his name, a number, no title. "I know what it's like," he said, "to be underestimated by the people who should have known better." And then he left, back into the living room, back into the noise, as if he'd never been there at all. I stared at the card in my hand, the blood on the napkin, and the gift still tucked beneath my chair, unopened, untouched. For the first time in years, I felt something stir. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. I didn't stay much longer. After Leonard Kane disappeared into the crowd, I collected my things, my cardigan draped over a chair, the scrapbook I'd made still sealed in its ribbon. I left the scholarship envelope on the buffet table right beside the champagne. No one saw me leave. Outside, the night was warm, the sky clear, and I walked a few blocks before calling a ride. I didn't cry, I didn't text anyone, I just breathed, in and out. Like I taught my patients when the panic came, steady, low, slow. That evening haunted me for days. I replayed it all, the smirks, the jokes, the way my mother had looked at me like I was some neighbour who'd dropped by uninvited. I thought of Tiffany's voice in the kitchen. 42 and still nothing. That sting didn't come from her words. It came from how true they'd sounded when no one defended me. At the clinic, I worked like usual, long hours, endless charts, check-ins, medication runs. No one there asked if I was married or how big my apartment was. They just needed care, and I gave it. It was the only place I felt whole. A week later, I opened my mail and found a letter from the State Board of Nursing. I'd been nominated for the Regional Compassionate Caregiver Award. I blinked, thought it was spam. But there it was, official seal, real signature. I hadn't applied. 2 days after that, a representative from Kane Medical Foundation called, inviting me to a luncheon honouring contributors to community health. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't have the right clothes, I didn't belong there. But something in me remembered Leonard Kane's words, "They don't see you." Maybe it was time someone did. I dusted off my one good pair of heels and borrowed a blazer from a co-worker. When I arrived at the downtown hotel, the lobby sparkled. Everyone looked polished, effortless. I felt like a child in a masquerade ball, tolerated but misplaced. Then I saw him, Leonard Kane, across the room speaking quietly with a small group. He saw me and nodded, exactly like he had that night. A simple acknowledgement, no fanfare. After the speeches, the awards, the lukewarm chicken and over-salted vegetables, Leonard approached me at the refreshment table. "I'm glad you came," he said. I smiled, nervous. "This isn't usually my kind of crowd." He studied me for a second. "It should be." I looked away. "I'm not like them." He didn't argue, just said, "That's precisely why you're needed." Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I'd like you to meet someone." I didn't know what to expect when Leonard said he wanted me to meet someone. In my head, I imagined another older executive, maybe a potential donor or board member, someone I'd have to make polite small talk with while pretending I wasn't wildly out of place in a second-hand blazer and heels that pinched. Instead, he introduced me to a man in jeans and a navy button-down, clean-cut, early 40s, a quiet confidence that didn't need a Rolex to prove its worth. His handshake was warm, his smile thoughtful, not too wide, not too practiced. "Natalie, this is my son, Elliot," Leonard said simply. "Son?" It took everything in me not to let my eyes widen. This was the Elliot Kane. I'd read about him. Everyone in healthcare had. A former ER doctor turned biotech entrepreneur, now head of Kane Health Innovations, a man whose software was transforming the way rural clinics operated. But he didn't look like someone who ran a multi-million-dollar company. He looked normal, calm, human. "Your father's told me a lot about you," he said. I laughed nervously. "He's only known me for 10 minutes. Elliot shrugged. "That's more than enough time for him to form an opinion. Trust me." Leonard chuckled and excused himself, leaving us standing awkwardly by the iced tea pitchers. I expected Elliot to launch into networking small talk, but instead he asked, "So, Oakview, you've been there how long?" 16 years, I said. "Longer than I meant to, but I stayed." "Because?" I hesitated. "Because the patients there don't have anywhere else to go. Because I couldn't walk away." He nodded, and something softened in his eyes. "That's the same reason I stayed in medicine longer than I needed to. It's hard to let go of people who rely on you." We talked for 15 minutes, then 30, then an hour, about patient care, burnout, how both of us used to skip meals during shifts and eat protein bars in janitor closets, about our mothers, his, who passed when he was in college, mine, who still didn't know my middle name. It didn't feel like networking. It felt like remembering who I was before I became invisible. When I got home that night, I sat on my couch and stared at the city lights outside my window. A text buzzed in, from Elliot Kane. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime? Off the record, no speeches." I read it 3 times before replying. Yes, our first coffee wasn't at some high-end cafe with marble countertops and $8 lattes. Elliot chose a small corner shop near the medical district. Chipped mugs, faded booths, and the best almond croissants I'd ever had. He was already there when I arrived, sleeves rolled up, reading something on his phone that looked more like a research abstract than a news feed. He stood when he saw me. "Natalie," he said, like the name was familiar already. "I hope this place is okay," he added, sliding a coffee across to me. "They know how to let you sit without rushing you out." I smiled. "It's perfect." We talked for nearly 2 hours that first time. Not just about work, though that was our common thread. He asked questions no one ever had. What would I change about public health if I had unlimited funding? What was the hardest part of nursing that no one ever warned me about? When had I last taken a real vacation? I had to laugh at that last one. "Does a day trip to the laundromat count?" He grinned. "Only if it includes cocktails." By the time we said goodbye, something in me had shifted. It wasn't butterflies. It was quieter than that, more grounded, like remembering how it felt to be listened to for real, not out of politeness, not as a favor, but because someone actually cared. Over the next few weeks, we met again. Sometimes coffee, sometimes walks after his meetings downtown. We never talked about the night at my brother's house, and I never brought up my family. But Elliot made it easy to exist in a different world, one where I wasn't just tolerated but welcomed. One evening we sat on a park bench, watching the skyline fade into dusk. He turned to me and said, "My father told me what he saw that night." I stiffened slightly. He added, "You didn't defend yourself. You didn't fight back. That takes strength people don't always recognize." I looked down. Sometimes I wonder if it was just cowardice. It wasn't. His voice was so certain, I believed him. Then he said, almost casually, "If you ever want to come with me to an event, something small, no pressure, I'd be proud to have you there." I blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You." I didn't say yes that night, but I didn't say no. And days later, when the invitation arrived for a small gala hosted by Kane Health, I opened the envelope, ran my fingers over the gold script, and said yes. The invitation was simple, elegant, white cardstock with embossed gold lettering. Kane Health Innovations, a celebration of community partnerships. It didn't sound like much. Just another fundraiser, I assumed. Until I looked at the guest list. City officials, hospital directors, major donors, and tucked into a small line on the final page, keynote guest, Natalie Harper, RN. I thought it was a mistake. I called the number on the card. The woman on the other end, soft-spoken, efficient, said, "Oh yes, Miss Harper. Mr. Kane insisted." Elliot hadn't mentioned anything. I stared at the invitation for nearly an hour before deciding to go. The night of the gala, I wore a navy dress borrowed from a friend at work. Not designer, not tailored, but it made me feel clean, confident. I curled my hair for the first time in years and wore lipstick I'd bought in a moment of bravery, but never opened until now. The event was at a museum, white marble, glass walls, city lights glowing like stars below. I walked in and immediately wanted to walk out. Everyone looked polished, purposeful, like they belonged. I was just a nurse with a history of being invisible. Then I saw him, Elliot, talking to someone in a dark suit. When he spotted me, his face lit up, and he walked over like the rest of the room didn't exist. "You made it," he said, voice warm, eyes steady. "You didn't tell me I'd be listed as a guest." He gave a half grin. "I thought if I told you, you wouldn't come." "You're probably right." He offered me his arm. "Come on, my father wants to say hello." Leonard Kane greeted me with that same quiet nod, like he wasn't surprised at all to see me standing there among a sea of people who probably earned more in a month than I did in a year. "We're glad you're here, Natalie," he said. "This night is about people like you." I didn't know what to say, so I said thank you. But the real surprise came 20 minutes later when a familiar voice called my name from across the atrium. "Natalie?" I turned, and there they were. Tiffany, my brother, my niece, my mother. Their eyes scanned me in disbelief. I could almost hear Tiffany's mind ticking. The dress, the crowd, Elliot beside me. My mother blinked. "What are you doing here?" Elliot stepped forward, his hand gently at my back. "She's being honoured." Tiffany's mouth fell open. I smiled. "It's nice to see you all." It was the first time I'd ever said that and meant something else entirely. My family didn't speak for a few seconds. It was the kind of silence that doesn't ask questions. It demands answers. My mother's gaze darted from Elliot to the Kane Foundation banners on the walls, then back to me. "You're being honoured?" she repeated, as if testing the words in her mouth like they were foreign and bitter. "For her service to the community," Elliot said, calm as ever. "She's made a real difference." Tiffany tilted her head. "Oh, that's lovely." But her smile never reached her eyes. My brother, never one for emotional intelligence, blurted, "Wait, are you two?" "We're dating," I said gently, firmly. My mother's expression collapsed into something unreadable. Not quite anger, not yet envy, just confusion. "You never said anything," she whispered. I shrugged. "You never asked." The moment hung there, fragile and suspended, until Leonard Kane himself approached. "Natalie," he said, loud enough for all of them to hear, "they're ready for your segment, shall we?" I nodded, offering Elliot a glance that said everything. "You don't have to come, but I want you to." He walked with me to the edge of the small platform where a microphone waited. I stood in front of the crowd, people in suits and gowns, holding glasses of wine, and for once I wasn't nervous. Not because I belonged, necessarily, but because I no longer cared if I didn't. I told them about the clinic, the patients who brought tamales as thank yous, who cried during checkups because no one had touched them gently in months. I spoke of long nights, burned out staff, and the power of listening. I didn't embellish. I didn't perform. I just told the truth. When I stepped down, there was applause, not thunderous, not staged, just real. Later, while sipping water by a sculpture I couldn't afford to describe, my niece approached me. Her voice was quiet, different. "Aunt Natalie, I didn't know. I didn't know you did all that." I smiled. "Most people don't." She hesitated, then said, "I'm proud of you." It was the most unexpected sentence of the night. Then, from behind her, Tiffany's voice, "Natalie, could we talk sometime? I think we got off on the wrong foot." I didn't flinch. Maybe another time. For the first time in years, I wasn't desperate to be included. I didn't need their seat at the table. I had built my own. 3 days passed before the messages began. First, a text from my brother. "Hey, heard you did a big thing last weekend. That's cool. We should catch up soon." Then Tiffany, her words suspiciously polished. "Natalie, I've been reflecting. Maybe I judged too quickly. Let's get coffee. My treat." But the one that made me stop mid-step on my clinic's hallway was from my mother. "You should come for dinner Sunday. I'll make your favourite. Bring your friend, if you'd like." Friend. Not Elliot. Not boyfriend. Just friend. But even that was progress. I didn't reply right away. A younger version of me would have rushed to accept, hungry for scraps of validation, aching to believe, maybe this time, they meant it. But this version of me had stood on a stage, told her story, and watched the people who once dismissed her blink in the light of who she'd become. That Sunday, Elliot drove me to the house I hadn't visited in over a year. His hand rested gently on my knee as we parked. "You don't have to go in," he said. "We can leave any time." "I know," I whispered, "but I want to see if anything's changed." The door opened before I knocked. Tiffany greeted us with an enthusiastic smile and a waft of perfume. She looked elegant, perfectly casual, like someone trying very hard not to look like she was trying. Inside, the dining table was set. My mother stood in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot that smelled suspiciously like store-bought sauce. "Elliot," she said, voice tight but cordial, "welcome." We sat, ate, talked, mostly about neutral things, weather, my niece's classes, a new show they were binging. Elliot was gracious, offering polite comments, deflecting awkward questions with humour. Then halfway through dessert, my mother said, "Natalie, I was wrong." The room froze. She continued, "I didn't see how much you were doing. I don't know what I thought. Maybe I didn't want to look too closely." I stared at her. "Why now?" She looked down at her fork. "Because everyone else is seeing it, and I realised I was the only one pretending not to." Tiffany chimed in, too brightly. "We just want to reconnect. Rebuild." All. But there was something hollow in her tone. And the way she glanced at Elliot, evaluating, calculating, made my stomach tighten. They didn't want me. They wanted proximity to him, to power, to influence. And for the first time in my life, I saw it clearly. I stirred the last spoonful of melting dessert around my plate, watching the swirl of syrup and cream blur together. It reminded me of my past with this family, sweet and bitter, messy and ultimately unrecognizable. Elliot, ever observant, squeezed my hand under the table. It was a small gesture, but grounding. I breathed in. "Tiffany," I said evenly, "I appreciate the offer to reconnect, but what would we be rebuilding exactly?" She blinked, taken off guard. "Well, our relationship, of course." "Our relationship," I repeated. "You mean the one where I'm mocked at dinner tables? Where I'm called a volunteer nurse and seated with the kids?" Tiffany's mouth opened, then closed. My brother shifted uncomfortably. "Natalie, come on, that was just—" "No," I cut in gently. "That was the relationship, and I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done pretending it was something it wasn't." My mother stiffened. "So what? You're cutting us off because you have some new man and a fancy event behind you now?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm drawing boundaries because for the first time in my life, I know I'm allowed to." The silence that followed was thick with things left unsaid. Elliot rose, nodding toward me. "Thank you for dinner," he said courteously. "It's clear you put effort into tonight." He helped me into my coat, and we walked to the door. No dramatic exits, no slammed doors, just a quiet departure, one I had never believed I had the power to make. Outside, the air was crisp. "I didn't expect that to go so well," Elliot said with a smile, wrapping an arm around me. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "Well? That was well?" He kissed the top of my head. "You were strong. You didn't flinch. That's more than most people manage with their families." We stood by the car a while longer, just breathing. I wasn't sure what would come next, if they'd text again or let the silence stretch. But I no longer needed their validation. I had mine. The letter came in an ivory envelope with gold lettering and a wax seal that felt unnecessarily regal. At first, I thought it was another invitation from the Kane Foundation. But when I opened it, my breath caught. It was a wedding invitation. My niece. She was getting married, and I was invited. I turned the card over twice, looking for a mistake, but there it was, my name, printed clearly, listed under family. No mention of Tiffany's handwriting, no passive-aggressive note about RSVPing late. Just an invitation, plain and direct. I placed it on the counter and stared at it for hours. The truth was, I hadn't seen my niece much since the gala. She'd sent a few messages, articles I might like, pictures from school, thoughtful things, nothing forced. We hadn't rebuilt a deep bond, but something quiet had shifted between us. Still, I couldn't decide if I should go. "It doesn't have to mean anything," Elliot said gently as I mulled it over. "But it can, if you want it to." He didn't push. He never did. But I could tell he understood the weight of it. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a mirror, a test, a chance to see if everything I'd grown into would shrink the moment I stepped back into old walls. In the end, I went. Not for them. For me. I wore a slate blue dress. Simple, tailored, mine. I didn't borrow anything. I didn't ask for advice. I didn't show up early to help set up. I arrived on time, walked in with Elliot, and took my place among the guests like I belonged there, because I did. Tiffany looked stunned when she saw us. My brother gave a hesitant smile. My mother looked away. But my niece, she ran across the hall in her bridal gown, hugged me like a whirlwind, and whispered, "Thank you for coming. I was hoping you would." And just like that, everything that didn't matter faded. We sat at a table near the front, not hidden, not ignored. My name was printed on the place card in elegant script, no sarcasm laced between the lines. When the toasts began and the champagne flowed, Tiffany stood to speak. Her words were polished, practiced, warm in all the right places, And then she said something I never thought I'd hear. "There are people who make noise," she said, raising her glass, "and people who build foundations so strong they don't have to shout. Natalie, thank you for everything you've done for this family, even when we didn't see it." Every head turned toward me. Elliot's hand found mine. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just nodded and smiled. After Tiffany's toast, the applause was warm but cautious, like everyone in the room knew something unspoken had just happened. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough. During dinner, my niece came to sit beside me, still in her gown, veil tucked behind her shoulders. "You look so beautiful," I told her. She smiled. "I feel like myself today, not just a bride, just me." I understood that feeling too well. "You know," she added, glancing toward the main table, "there was a time I didn't think you'd show up. Not because you didn't care, but because I thought maybe we'd burned that bridge." I met her eyes. "You didn't, but others tried." She nodded, her expression suddenly older than her years. "I saw how they treated you. For a long time I thought it was normal, that you were just different, quiet, outside." "And now?" I asked. "Now I know," she said simply. "They were wrong." There was something deeply healing in that, being seen not by those who had wounded me, but by someone who once watched it happen and chose to grow. Later, as the music picked up and people began to dance, Elliot pulled me gently onto the floor. "You did it," he whispered against my ear. "I didn't do anything," I murmured. He pulled back slightly, looked into my eyes. "Exactly." We moved slowly, easily, like the world had finally stopped spinning long enough for me to find balance. Around us, laughter and clinking glasses filled the hall. Then something unexpected happened. My mother walked toward us. She wasn't smiling, not exactly, but her face was softer. Her hands, slightly trembling, held a small velvet box. "I was cleaning out the attic," she said, "and I found this. It was your grandmother's. She would have wanted you to have it." Inside was a brooch, silver and sapphire, old-fashioned, elegant. I took it carefully, unsure what to say. "She wore it to her wedding," my mother added. "Said it gave her courage." I looked up. "Why now?" Her lips pressed together. "Because I think maybe you've shown more courage than any of us ever did." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come. I nodded. "Thank you." And this time I meant it. The following weeks felt like living in the echo of a song that used to make me cry. Familiar, yes, but no longer painful. My family didn't transform overnight. They still slipped into old patterns sometimes. My brother still forgot birthdays. Tiffany still made backhanded compliments sound like praise, but they were trying. And more importantly, I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. Elliot and I spent more time together, walking through weekend markets, making dinner from scratch, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. For once, I wasn't just building someone else's life. I was living mine. One evening, as we sat on my tiny balcony watching the sun drip gold over the skyline, Elliot turned to me with that quiet confidence I'd come to love. "My father's retiring," he said. "He's stepping back from the foundation, and the board's asked me to take over full time." I smiled. "They'd be lucky to have you." "There's more," he added. "We're launching a new initiative, bringing better health access to underserved urban communities. It's ambitious, and we'll need someone to lead it." He looked at me, eyes steady. "I want that person to be you." My breath caught. "Me?" "You've done it for years, Natalie, without the funding, without the support, without the credit. Imagine what you could do with all three." It was everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd never dared ask for. But the decision wasn't simple. Oakview Clinic wasn't glamorous. But it was home. My patients knew me by name. I knew which of their kids had asthma, which seniors needed extra time walking in. I wasn't just a nurse there. I was part of their rhythm. "I don't know," I whispered. "Leaving them feels like abandoning them." Elliot took my hand. "Helping more doesn't mean you've helped less. You don't have to choose between impact and scale. You can grow without forgetting where you started. The words stayed with me long after the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time, the choice wasn't between sacrifice and silence. It was between staying safe and stepping into my power. I didn't say yes right away. Instead, I gave myself a week of early morning shifts, of bandaging scrapes, changing dressings, listening to stories from patients who remembered when the clinic still had broken windows and a leaky roof, a week of walking the same halls where I'd once cried in supply closets and laughed over vending machine coffee. It was my version of a farewell tour, just in case. One afternoon I sat with Mrs. Delgado, one of our long-time patients. Her arthritis had flared again, and I was adjusting her medication. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "You seem different lately. Softer but taller, you know." I smiled. "Taller?" She nodded. "Like you've stopped shrinking for other people." That night, I walked the clinic one last time after closing. Lights off, empty halls, just me and the echoes of everything I'd built quietly over the years. And I knew. I walked into Elliot's office the next day, found him in a conference call, his sleeves rolled up, his glasses slightly crooked. He looked up, hopeful. "I'm in," I said. The grin that broke across his face was something I'd remember forever. We didn't throw a party or announce anything on social media. We just started. The work was demanding, travel, strategy meetings, endless logistics, but every challenge felt like a stretch in the right direction. I wasn't leaving Oakview behind. I was carrying it with me. And Elliot, he wasn't just supportive. He was present. He never once asked me to shrink to make room for him. If anything, he made space and stood beside me as I filled it. Then one evening, months later, after a long community outreach session, he surprised me on that same balcony with 2 glasses of wine and something small wrapped in a cloth napkin. It wasn't a ring. It was the sapphire brooch my mother had given me, refitted into a pendant, now hanging from a delicate chain. "I had it reset," he said, his voice soft, "because I didn't want you to forget where your strength started, but I also wanted you to carry it forward, your way." I stared at it, then at him. "I don't need a ring to know what we are," he said, "but if you ever want one, it's yours." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kissed him, slow, deep, grateful, because for the first time, love didn't feel like an escape. It felt like home. It wasn't until I was invited back to Oakview as a guest speaker that I realized just how far I'd traveled, not in miles, but in identity. I stood at the front of the same clinic where I'd once mopped floors after hours, now speaking to a group of new nurses about leadership, equity, and compassion. The name tag they handed me read, Natalie Harper, Director, Community Impact Division, Kane Health. I tucked it into my blazer pocket. I didn't need a title to know who I was. After the session, as I chatted with some of the staff, I noticed a familiar figure in the hallway. My mother. She looked smaller somehow. Not in stature, but in presence. Like she wasn't sure how to exist here, in this version of my world. "I saw the flyer," she said. "Thought I'd stop by." "Sure," I replied, careful but calm. She looked around. "I didn't realize it was this big. What you're doing now?" I nodded. "It's not just me." She held my gaze. "No, but it started with you." It wasn't a declaration of guilt or a sweeping apology, but it was enough. As she turned to go, she paused at a corkboard near the clinic entrance. Photos of community events, patient thank yous, volunteer spotlights. Right in the centre was a picture of me, Elliot by my side from the gala. Beneath it, someone had written in block letters. She reminded us we were worth saving. My mother didn't say anything. She just reached out and lightly touched the photo. When she left, I stood there for a moment staring at the board. The faces, the memories, they'd seen me all along. It was just my family who hadn't, until now. A few weeks later, I was seated beside Elliot at a community fundraiser, another elegant rooftop event. this one hosted by one of our partner organizations. The night shimmered with string lights and polished conversation, but my attention was elsewhere. Across the rooftop, I spotted Tiffany and my brother. I hadn't expected to see them here, not among the non-profit circles where I now lived and breathed, but there they were. Tiffany in a sleek black dress, my brother awkwardly adjusting his collar as he followed her like a man 2 steps behind his own life. When our eyes met, I gave a polite nod. To my surprise, Tiffany crossed the room. "Natalie," she said, "I've been following the updates on the new clinic initiative. It's impressive." "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice even. She looked away for a beat. "I realized something recently. Back then, when I treated you the way I did, it wasn't because I thought you were beneath me." I tilted my head. "No," she shook hers. "It's because I was terrified you weren't, that maybe you were everything I pretended to be. And now you're proving it." I didn't soften, but I didn't strike either. Growth, I'd learnt, isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about restraint. Elliot appeared beside me, offering a glass of sparkling water. Tiffany's eyes flicked to him, then to me. "I wish you both well," she said, and this time it sounded real. Later that evening, as we stood near the edge of the rooftop watching the city pulse beneath us, Elliot slid an arm around my waist. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "More than okay." Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't proving myself to anyone. I was just living, visible, valued, and completely whole. Months later, I found myself walking through a new clinic still under construction, our 3rd site in the initiative. The floors weren't finished yet, and the smell of fresh paint hung in the air, sharp and alive with promise. A young volunteer followed me, notebook in hand, peppering me with questions. She reminded me of myself once, full of questions, unsure if her voice mattered, desperate to belong. "Natalie," she asked, "how did you know when you'd made it, when things changed?" I smiled. I didn't. It just started feeling easier to breathe, like I wasn't shrinking anymore. She nodded, scribbling that down like it was gospel. Maybe for her it would be. As we walked past a wall that would eventually hold patient art, I paused, imagining it full of colour, of stories, of people who'd find hope here. People who, like me, had once believed they weren't enough. Back home that evening, Elliot was making dinner, barefoot, humming, relaxed in the kitchen we now shared. He looked up as I walked in, eyes crinkling with that quiet joy I'd come to rely on. "Tired?" he asked. "Full," I said, "in every way." He kissed my temple, then reached into his pocket and handed me a tiny envelope. Inside was a photo, grainy, a bit out of focus, but unmistakable. My mother, holding the pendant, smiling. "She sent it this morning," he said. "No note, just this." I held the photo in my hands, stunned. "She sees you now," he said. I wasn't sure if that was true, but it didn't matter anymore, because I saw me, and I knew, deep in my bones, that was enough.